and salutations. I come to you with this boring wall and a Scarlet Witch cosplay because I was just filming Wanda cosplay TikToks, and I figured before I got out of cosplay I would film a video that I've been wanting to make for a while now in this cosplay because it's kind of like on theme, it's on brand, where I want to recommend some comic books that I think are good for beginners. I get a lot of people, particularly young people and particularly young girls, in my comments, especially on Marvel videos, saying that they want to start reading comics but they have no idea where to begin, and I completely get that. Starting to read comics is very overwhelming. I remember when I began I was completely overwhelmed. I stuck to very specific characters for a long time, and I think even when you're kind of like going online and looking to do research about what characters you want to read or where to start, it can still be very confusing to try and figure out what you specifically want to read and where to go from that. So I have compiled a short list of specifically Marvel comics that I would recommend to beginners, and I'm going to explain why I recommend each of them. All of these can also be found as trade paperbacks because I will be honest, if you are starting to read comics, trade paperbacks are your best friend. They're way less intimidating than having to figure out where to start with single issues. You can go back far enough that you can catch up with single issues, because I feel like starting to read with single issue comics only works if there's only a few issues out right now. Trade paperbacks are great. They are like 5 or 6 issues, sometimes more, depending on the length of the series, kind of compiled into a paperback for you. You can also get them on your Kindle, which is how I started reading SpiderMan comics. Trade paperbacks are much more accessible, much easier. So these are all available as trade paperbacks. I'm also specifically doing Marvel because, one, I read more Marvel realistically, with the exception of Harley Quinn, who I read everything for. Also, I feel like majority of my audience is interested in Marvel. Also, then I can split this into 2 videos and do a separate one for DC and maybe a third of like non-Marvel or DC stuff, and I can create more content because I'm a hack. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to recommend, if you're an MCU fan wanting to get into Marvel comics and you have no idea where to start, if you don't even know like necessarily how to read a comic, because some people don't, sometimes just the idea of reading a comic and the formatting of that can be really intimidating. Marvel do this thing for some films where they will do comic preludes for the story. So they will do either like kind of a recap on a character's history in comic form or something leading up to the events of the film in comic form. These are usually all available as trade paperbacks again, but you can just read something that is set in the MCU to get you used to reading the formatting of comics, and then you get like extra bonus content for your favorite characters and for your favorite films. The main recommendation I have for people who are starting to read specifically Marvel comics is also probably my favorite Marvel comic series from the past 30 years, The Unbelievable Gwenpool. So, not to be confused with Gwen Stacy, Gwendolyn Poole is a 19-year-old girl who is from our universe. She is a Marvel superfan from our universe. She reads comics, she plays video games, she watches the Marvel movies, and she gets transported magically into the world of Marvel comics. This is a perfect jumping off point because she is the most perfect audience surrogate you will ever find. It's targeted at young readers and it's so much fun. There's a sequel series, but we ignore it because I hate it. Her only superpowers are her knowledge that she has from comics and video games and movies of this world. She's just the perfect audience surrogate, and this series, it was relatively short. I think there are 4 or 5 trade paperbacks for the whole series. Fantastic. It's some of my favorite writing ever. It's so interesting. Gwen is one of my favorite characters of all time. She's great. I love Gwenpool. Yeah, The Unbelievable Gwenpool is my #1 recommendation if you want to start reading Marvel comics. Another very fun, very, I think, accessible and easy to read series in the Marvel comic universe if you're just beginning is the Young Avengers series, which I think will be very important very soon in the MCU. There have been 2 runs of Young Avengers, and I would honestly recommend both of them. There was one in the mid-2000s, then one I think in like 2015. It was pretty recent. Little bit of a different lineup, some of the characters are the same. You can jump into either of them without really having any previous knowledge of the world, I would say, and have like the most fun. They're basically like the GSA of the Marvel Comics world, and they're great and I love them, and very gay, very fun, very easy to read, and not expecting you to know everything about the laws of the world or anything. They're funny, they're engaging, the art is gorgeous in both. I think if you're looking to start out with, I'd probably recommend the 2015 one over anything. I think that's also what the MCU is going to draw off of. But if you like that one, go back and read the other. Yeah, Young Avengers. Kate Bishop's there. We love her. She's very important, very soon. When am I uploading this video? The first episode of Hawkeye might be out by the time I upload this. Like, ugh. It's really good. It's very gay and fun, and a lot of like everyone my age I know loves Young Avengers, and there is a reason for that. It is popular for a reason. Another really good, just stepping your toes in kind of character to start with is Ms. Marvel. Kamala Khan. Marvel do this thing now with like young readers specifically they're targeting, but they have like these like kind of like smaller, thicker, cheaper, which we love, paperbacks that kind of collect whole backstories of characters that are specifically popular with young people. So Kamala Khan has these because I got my sister one for Christmas, so I know this. But Kamala Khan is a great character to start with. It's a really good coming of age story, and a story where she really looks up to Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers, the old Ms. Marvel, Carol Danvers. It's the story about her kind of initially trying to be her and trying to look like physically looking like her, and it's this wonderful coming of age story of Kamala kind of recognizing that she has a place for herself as a superhero and she can be her own kick-ass superhero without like relying on looking like Carol or acting like Carol. She has a really fun friend group. It's Ms. Marvel. 10 out of 10 recommend. It's very easy to kind of read her whole history because of the way that Marvel are publishing her stuff right now as paperbacks. Thank you, Marvel. Now, if you happen to already really like the MCU and want to read something specifically about a character from there or a series from there, I can recommend things. Beginning with WandaVision, because I look like this. The thing that I would recommend to you is Tom King's run of Vision. This was definitely, I know, 2015 series. You can get the whole thing as one paperback book, which is very fun. It focuses on Vision more than like Wanda as well, although Wanda is there. But it kind of goes through this history of Vision creating this fake suburban life for himself and trying to live in suburbia. It's one of the most fucked up Marvel comics I've ever read, which I love. I love twisted shit like that. Yeah, seriously one of my favorite Marvel things I've read ever, I think. So if you like WandaVision, Tom King's run of Vision is great, and it's a contained story. You don't really need any other knowledge of anything. WandaVision was heavily influenced by it too. WandaVision was also heavily influenced by House of M. So if you want to pick up House of M, that is also going to tie into WandaVision. You're going to notice all of the parallels. However, House of M, you kind of do need a bit more knowledge and context of the world with. Like, you kind of need to read like Avengers Disassembled beforehand, and you just kind of need to know some X-Men characters. You need to be more familiar with the world. So I'd recommend that once you kind of are a bit more comfy. And Scarlet Witch also had a solo series that you can get, I think, as a collected paperback as well as smaller trade paperbacks, that it's just Wanda-centric, that isn't as like heavily directly WandaVision inspired, but if you like Wanda's character, it's a great kind of story about her reclaiming her narrative and trying to learn how to be a hero again after the events of some shit that went down. If you like MCU Spider-Man, if you love MCU Peter Parker, because a lot of young people really like MCU Peter Parker and there is nothing wrong with that. But if you like MCU Spider-Man, I would actually really recommend a Spidey series. I think this as well is published in like the little young people appealing paperbacks, but this is kind of like a very short series, almost like a retelling of Peter Parker's youth, because obviously Peter Parker has been an adult in Marvel Comics for a hot minute now. Spidey, I think, actually began around the time Homecoming was coming out. I think it was like 2016, 2017 that this was running. It's kind of like a rehash of teenage Peter Parker, and you see a lot of familiar faces. There's cameos from other Marvel characters, and he's written pretty similarly to Tom Holland's Spider-Man. If you just like Spider-Man in general and want to read a really good Spider-Man story that is contained, pretty much everything I'm recommending is like you can just read it and have all the context you need within this one story. But Spider-Man Life Story, this is in my top 3 Spider-Man stories of all time, I think. It is heartbreaking, it is beautiful, it kind of goes through all of the massive events in Marvel Comics and like the massive like kind of moments in Spider-Man's history, but like properly through time. I don't know how to explain this. Get some tissues before you read it. It's gorgeous. If you like Spider-Man, I'd really, really recommend this, as it is a pretty good like history of Spider-Man too, so it's great for just learning about the comic history of the character. If you again like MCU Spider-Man though, I actually, more so than recommending Peter Parker stories, I would actually recommend Miles Morales' stories to you, because MCU Peter does borrow, that's how I'll say it, a lot from Miles's story. Again, those tiny little cheap trade paperbacks, the really thick ones that Marvel do, they've been going through Miles' entire history. I might even link in the comments some like just Amazon links or something. If you want to read a very similar kind of story to MCU Spider-Man, I would recommend like all of Miles' stuff. And Miles is a Spider-Man that's very easy to kind of catch up on the history of, because he was created a lot more recently than Peter Parker was. Speaking of, Gwen Stacy. I'm biased, I love Gwen Stacy a lot. If you want to read about Spider-Gwen, again, Marvel have these little trade paperbacks which are the greatest thing ever. And again, Gwen is a very recent character, so it's very easy to read all of her stuff. I've been reading all of her stuff since it was like first being published, I can't say that for that many characters because I'm a youngin and I only started reading comics really when I was 14. Specifically her first like kind of series, as well as Spider-Gwen Ghost Spider, fantastic. The most recent is probably my least favorite. You see a lot of Peter Parker and her friendship there, which is everything to me, so we love that. If you like Loki, the main recommendation that I would have for Loki is, again, it's a completed series, Loki, Agent of Asgard. One of my favorite Loki series ever. Went for a little while. You get some great moments. There's like a Harry Styles reference in one issue that made me yell. It was the greatest thing ever. Really recommend Loki, Agent of Asgard. Also a very, very short, snappy series. It was very political at the time. That is Vote Loki. That's kind of where the idea of President Loki in the Loki series comes from. It's very political though, so if you don't really care about that, maybe just stick with Loki, Agent of Asgard, but yeah. And just because Hawkeye is coming so soon, one of my favorite Marvel series ever, and I think a really, really good starter comic, is the 2012 Hawkeye run. It was by Matt Fraction and David Aja. I just had to read that off because I forget people's authors' names a lot. It's going to show you why MCU Hawkeye could be a lot better, but you'll fall so in love with Hawkeye, and it's such a good starting point. And yeah, I don't know, that probably wasn't helpful. Something that's a bit of fun, a short series, I think there's 2 trade paperbacks for it. I read it as single issues, but it was a couple years ago now. There was a Amazing Mary Jane series, which is basically just about her being an actress. Amazing Mary Jane is just basically about her making a movie with Mysterio. Another really good kind of starting point if you're a bit intimidated by like the superhero stuff and you want more like romance stuff is Spider-Man Loves Mary Jane. If there are any other characters that you want me to like recommend things for, or any specific Marvel movies that you want recommendations based off of, please comment them below and I'll make a follow-up video. This is kind of just off the top of my head, assuming what characters and the kind of things people would want to start reading on based on my audience, but I could be completely wrong. So if you want me to recommend things, leave me a comment and I'll reply to it, or I can do a follow-up video. Thank you for dealing with me looking like a Walmart Wanda Maximoff this entire time too. If you liked this video, feel free to subscribe. I have a Patreon if you want to help support cosplay stuff. There's bonus videos and more cosplay stuff on there. Obviously no pressure, but if you want to. I'm saving up for a Black Cat cosplay right now. Could be a cool, fun time. Thank you to Leith, Liam, and Tyler for being Sith Lords, and thank you all for watching. I love you very much. I will see you very soon. Mwah. Also, just to put it out there, I have recently been considering creating like an online comic book club, specifically that is kind of focused on being like a safe space for young women to get into comics. Obviously everyone is welcome, but I'll be very I'll be monitoring and very harsh about anyone who's gatekeeping or making anyone feel unsafe. We can just kind of talk about comics and not be mean to each other. We can all just talk about things we love and things we disliked peacefully and make it a fun little club. If anyone is interested in that, let me know and I'll think more seriously about doing it. But yeah, bye.